Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Casey Michel has written a stunning investigation and indictment to the elements in United States' foreign lobby industry and the threat they pose to democracy. It comes off the back of his successful book, American Kleptocracy. Delighted to say the new book is called Foreign Agents, and Casey joins me live on the line now. Casey, good afternoon from us. Good morning to you.
Giles, thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Whereabouts are you, by the way, this morning?
Sitting here in beautiful Brooklyn, New York.
Very nice too, and that's probably about the sunniest it might get with our next book, because it is lifting a rock and shining a light on a segment of American politics that perhaps most of us don't really think about or even want to think about. Just explain a little bit about how you came about this one.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, and I'm very grateful to be, living here in Brooklyn, and of course, writing these books on all these topics from the belly of the beast, so to speak. The new book, Foreign Agents, it's about a relatively simple concept, a relatively simple construct, and that is the foreign lobbying industry right here in the United States of America. When we talk about foreign lobbyists, when I write about them in this book, these are the Americans. These are the American firms, the American figures that sign up to represent and lobby on behalf of not other American clients, not other American companies, but authoritarian, autocratic, and dictatorial regimes abroad. Despots, tyrants, related oligarchs, related proxies, so on and so on and so on. These are who these Americans are representing in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. And this is who these Americans are opening doors for and affecting American policy on behalf of and laundering the images thereafter. This is who these Americans are working for. And this is what comprises the foreign lobbying industry in the United States. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It has grown year in, year out like clockwork. I know you asked how I got started in this. I had a wonderful experience years and years ago when I was, a lot younger and a lot better shape than I am now, working as a reporter in Houston, Texas. I was doing a story on a local Azerbaijan cultural center, and the woman who was running it said, "Hey, look, you seem like you're interested in Azerbaijan. You seem like you're interested in international affairs, so on and so on. Why don't you come with us to Azerbaijan with some other members of Congress? We're flying them over. You know what? We could fly you over as well. We can put you up over there. It would be great. You could do some on-the-ground reporting." I said, "Look, what an opportunity. Who am I to say no?" And she said, "Great. The only thing we ask is that you don't write anything negative about Azerbaijan, just the positive stuff, please." And I say, "Ooh, that might be a bridge too far." And so I ended up saying no. The fun coded to that story, Giles, is literally just a few weeks ago, too recent to make it into the new book. She pleaded guilty to foreign agents related charges right here in the United States for acting as an unregistered foreign lobbyist for the government of Azerbaijan. So it's always nice to have things come full circle.
One of the things, though, I mean, I work as a journalist, and we are forever being given press freebies, press trips. I mean, Azerbaijan makes me smile, because a journalist friend of mine went out to Baku and came back saying, "I can't, you get away from the main hotels. It's a very interesting place." But journalists have always done this freebie, and it's not a conversation I'm going to get into in this one about, journalism versus PR journalism, because everything's always wonderful and, hey, I will have my hotel suite. But when it gets to lobbying and you've got members of Congress going out there and being wined and dined and something else, that is are we talking mid-level political figures, mid-level industry figures who think, well, hey, I've worked hard, I want to enjoy this, I'm in my 40s, my 50s, this is a really good payday, especially for an emerging nation like the ones you mentioned.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. These are certainly, staffers, mid-level folks, kind of across the board. Again, we're talking about both the right and the left ends of the political spectrum. This is very much a bipartisan issue in the United States of America. And frankly, for a long time, that is who these lobbyists were primarily targeting, was the advisors, was the, those in the, immediate circles of these officials themselves. Maybe they would go sit down with the members of Congress themselves. But what we have seen in recent years, as this industry has grown, as it has metastasized, as more and more firms are now being sucked into the foreign lobbying industrial complex, is they are going directly to members of Congress and they're going directly to the White House. So just to pick one case study in particular, which the book talks about, just a few months ago, for the very first time in American history, a sitting member of Congress was found guilty on foreign agents related charges. Again, the United States of America, more or less 250 years old at this point. It wasn't until this year that a sitting member of Congress, a Democratic senator from the great state of New Jersey, was convicted on conspiring to act as a foreign agent for the government of Egypt, secretly lobbying his contacts and his colleagues, ghostwriting material for the Egyptian dictatorship, sending them highly sensitive information without anyone having any idea until the charges came out and until he was convicted. Again, it was unprecedented, but it is a symbol. It's a microcosm of what this industry now does. It's no longer just those mid-level staffers that they are targeting or involved. Now they are going for the biggest fish they can find.
And the interesting thing, of course, is if you look at it in a historical context, they've always been lobbyists. It's part of the business. And in a geopolitical sense, anybody who wasn't a communist from 1945 onwards up until 1995 was to be applauded. So you had figures like you had what was happening in Central America. You had Vietnam. You had the Philippines. I mean, Marco was an absolute dictator, but you had the 73 in Allende in Chile. It was a case of these guys are anti-communist. We therefore, doesn't matter what they kind of do, we'll draw a blind eye. And American foreign policy was very much, let's support these guys.
Absolutely, it was. Anything that is on the right end of the spectrum, certainly anti-communist, at least as they're professing in the Cold War, that was going to get the American support, whether it was in the Americas, whether it was in Southeast Asia or Africa or around the world. There's one figure that I write about in the book, one gentleman who's one of the main characters, a guy named Paul Manafort. Giles, you and listeners may remember him. He was perhaps best known for leading Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. He ended up launching Trump to the White House itself. But he had an entire career prior to Trump's presidency. He had an entire career really creating the modern foreign lobbying industry as we know it. And Giles, to your point, what Manafort did especially was work for these nominally anti-communist figures and governments that were close allies of the United States of America during and even after the Cold War. So you just mentioned Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines. Manafort was one of his go-to lobbyists for cozying up to the Reagan administration. Out of Angola, you had a warlord, a gentleman engaged in sexual slavery and child soldiers. But again, he professed to be an anti-communist. Jonas Savimbi was his name. And Manafort opened door after door after door to him in Washington. There's a famous or infamous clip now that's online. Folks can go online and see. And there's Savimbi sitting on stage next to George H.W. Bush. And again, all of it because of who his foreign lobbying contacts in Washington were. And again, these are just a few case studies of the many you can point to.
But as we sort of thunder towards a presidential election in the States, politics, America and politics has always been expensive. But my goodness, it is. And then some. Your toes curl. And presumably, if you are an oil-rich nation with an autocratic leader, then he wants to have, the states looking favorably on him. So, hey, we're finding friends over. But and it creates a really interesting line. So it's a two-parter. What is foreign policy and what is lobbying / industrial?
Yeah. So I'll take the latter at first. So lobbying in the United States of America. It is a constitutionally protected right in the First Amendment of the American Constitution, right next to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press. There's a freedom that a lot of folks either overlook or forget. It's the right to petition your government for a redress of grievances, which is just an old-timey way of saying any American citizen could go to any legislator that they want and advocate on behalf of whatever it is, healthcare reform, environmental reform, foreign policy, you name it. That is what lobbying at its very core is, which is what makes it such a slippery issue to tackle, because these American firms and these American figures in the foreign lobbying industry, they're just using their constitutional rights, but they're not representing other Americans or themselves. Of course, they're representing heinous dictators abroad. That's what lobbying really is. And again, it has exploded on both the domestic as well as on the foreign lobbying side, multi-billion-dollar industry. You know, the term that folks like to use is the swamp, right? It is this insanely swampy atmosphere in Washington where it's pay to play. It's who you know and who has the deepest pockets can open the most doors. You know, where it intersects though with foreign policy, because again, this is one of the key planks of American government, of the federal government itself, is steering American foreign policy. And you go to school, you go to graduate school, you have all these nice notions of, grand strategy and realism and all these different kind of schools of thought. But when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, it is really a lot of legislators just flying by the seat of their pants. They are strapped for time. They are strapped for resources. And you know what they have been doing increasingly is turning to foreign lobbyists who are representing these foreign regimes and saying, what can we do? What should we do? What do you think your client would like? How can we help get them there? And oh, by the way, if we can help, do you think you would be interested in supporting my reelection campaign through campaign fundraising? Because, Giles, you just mentioned how expensive it is. One thing I did want to know, just the last note, it is still illegal for foreign governments, foreign nationals to donate directly to American legislators, to donate directly to American campaigns. But boy, there's a nice workaround where if the dictator or the tyrant in question is paying those foreign lobbyists, then those foreign lobbyists can in turn, even on the same exact day, send that money directly to the candidate themselves. It is, boy, talk about a loophole.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, okay, you can't have African dictators just rocking up and going, there's a bag of cash, but there are various ways and means, as anybody would know, in this business. It's also interesting as well, isn't it? Because in the 60s and 70s, everybody talks about, historians will say, well, it was the military industrial complex that kept the war in Nam going for X amount of years. But this is a different situation. You're actually walking, that was a Halliburton sort of thing. That was the big contractors. But this is something much more insidious. This is the highest bidder thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And I think the thing to remember is these regimes that we're talking about, and it's not just the Russias and the Chinas, it's also the Azerbaijans and the Turkeys and the Gabons and the Equatorial Guineas and the Venezuelas, so on and so forth. Many of these regimes have access to effectively bottomless pots of wealth. They can tap into the health budget. They can loot from the education budget. They can steal from the infrastructure budget whenever they want without any kind of oversight, without any kind of blowback. And of course, they're using that money for all kinds of things, paying for security services, paying for, whatever they need. But much of that money also ends up in the pockets of these foreign lobbyists, which is, again, why we have seen this industry explode in recent years, not just in terms of total revenue, but also in terms of personnel, in terms of new firms they are bringing in, and, of course, the access they are then opening in Washington. I've been working in this space for a while, however many years now, and I certainly haven't seen a bottom either financially or certainly morally or ethically for any of these firms involved.
If you are an autocrat with an awful lot of oil wells, so you can keep the money pumping in, presumably you can keep the money pumping into your lobbyists. So the last thing your lobbyist needs is a war or somebody just having to pop over the border. I mean, it is in your interest to keep autocrats, dictators in their place. And when something happens coming in from left field, as I believe you would say, it must really upset the people who are getting, cash and money, but also the politicals, because suddenly they're in a situation where they have a moral choice to make.
Yes. It's funny you mentioned that these, of course, there's this notion of stability, and obviously these regimes want to remain in power in perpetuity as much as they can. But of course, the geopolitical world is not constantly stable. There are constantly flare-ups and there are things beyond any of our control. And I'm reminded a few years ago, Giles, I know we've been talking about the country of Azerbaijan for a while in this conversation, but I'm reminded a few years ago when Azerbaijan launched one of its more recent, I don't know how many there have been, one of its recent wars against Armenia, not in the disputed territory itself, but on Armenian territory proper. I mean, it was for all intents and purposes an invasion. And what we saw was maybe this silver lining of optimism. Some of the firms that were representing Azerbaijan said, no. This is a bridge too far. We cannot stand for us. They were getting a lot of blowback from things like Armenian Americans or, certainly members of Congress that are representing Armenian Americans. And these firms were effectively shamed into dropping Azerbaijan, which was one of the original theories of why we have regulations in the first place, to try to shame some of these firms. Of course, it rarely, if ever, works. But that was one instance in which it did work. And they dropped Azerbaijan as a client. Now, unfortunately, a little bit of time passed, and it turned out that shame, however much it existed, had an expiration date. And when folks weren't paying attention any longer, those firms raced back to Azerbaijan, again, bottomless pots of oil wealth, and signed up Baku as a client once more.
You only have to turn on your TV and say, visit when the Grand Prix is on, you know, the big, and it's like, visit Baku, and wonderful, and people are having a lovely time. And it's the same with some of the other nations with, which we say, doubtful human rights records. The other thing is, since the rise of social media, because we're talking old school, now let's talk new school, a couple of things. A, you can hit everybody on every platform. And B, you just mentioned something really important, the attention span that we have. We don't read the huge Washington Times. We couldn't do, you know, a president's men job. You couldn't have that, you know, that in-depth investigation, because now it's like, oh, this is on TikTok, this is on X, formerly Twitter, or whatever Elon's calling it this week, and bam, bam, and we forget what was the outrage last week. And well, yeah, hey, but you know, the beaches look good.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Giles. I mean, even though this industry has existed for decades, right? And the book goes all the way back to the early 20th century, talking about the origins of the foreign lobbying industry in the U.S. Very much over the last 10 years, maybe even the last 5 years, we see these new tactics, we see these new efforts, and we see these new tools that foreign lobbyists and the regimes are using are tapping into. And one of those, of course, is social media, whether it is tweets, whether it is TikToks, increasingly even just the usage and the hiring of social media influencers, right? Models and talking heads who are by no means considered traditional lobbyists, and yet are still a prong of this foreign lobbying apparatus as we know it. You know, there are plenty of legal questions about whether they need to disclose what they're doing. That is ongoing. That's going to take a while. But while those conversations are still trying to sort out, you know, these social media influencers are still going to Saudi Arabia. They're going to United Arab Emirates. They're going to, you know, Brunei, you name it, and posting about how wonderful these regimes are, how misunderstood, how democratizing and how stable these regimes truly are. And boy, shouldn't we support them at the end of the day.
So when you do turn over this stone, what's the reaction for the ladies and the gentlemen who are having quite a nice time, a profitable time underneath that stone, to you going, hello, Casey here?
Yeah, look, you know, it's always a fun conversation. I remember, and again, I wasn't expecting to talk about Azerbaijan quite so much this time, but you know, that's life. You know, I'm reminded of a conversation I had a while ago with a woman who is, she's an academic. She's a think tanker in Washington. You know, she's testifying before Congress. She's writing in the New York Times. She's writing in the Washington Post, almost always about how Azerbaijan should be an American partner. And again, she's always posing as this nonpartisan, independent thinker. Well, it turns out she was on the payroll of Azerbaijan's state-run oil company, and it was a big fallout. You know, she had to have corrections appended to all of her big articles, so on and so on. But I had the chance to ask her about that. I said, you know, her name is Brenda Schaefer. I said, Brenda, you know, we just learned that you've been secretly on the payroll of the Azeri regime, presumably for a long time. You didn't disclose this to anyone, didn't disclose it to your editor, to Congress, to your students, so on and so forth. You know, what do you have to say for that? And she looked at me and she said, Casey, you know, I'm not sure why you're asking me that. I'm not here to ask you what your wife's name is. I'm not here to ask you what's your cholesterol. Actually, what is your cholesterol? And, you know, all of a sudden I'm thinking, my cholesterol? I have no idea what my cholesterol. What the hell does that have to do with Azerbaijan? And we have this back and forth for, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes. And of course, she never answers the question, but instead she just keeps demanding to know my cholesterol count. And again, when these people are found out, when these people are caught out, they have this deer in the headlights moment where they'll do anything to defend their positions and, of course, try to keep the spigots of all this payment coming to them open.
You see, this is the thing, especially amongst this new breed of politician, because they then go on the attack. They would normally get no comment or flounder, and now it's, I think you should have I think you're mentally ill. I don't think as we only saw a couple of days ago, you know, this was a mentally ill person. So I think you need therapy. What about you? Were you not happy as a child? I would hate to be you, etc. I mean, yeah.
No, I mean, it's slandering the questioner, right? It's maligning or impugning your own motives rather than addressing the issue head on, which is, in this case, she was acting as a mouthpiece without telling anyone for a heinous, bloodied regime, again, one of many, and using her position to target Americans across the board.
But the thing is, if you say, according to this think tank or according to this independent study, Most of us, even journalists, will go, okay, fine. They won't go and look at it to see exactly, because it doesn't say something like the Baku Independence Bureau. It will say, and again, apologies to any of my listeners in Azerbaijan, it just happens to crop up today. But if it was to say, the Caracas Institute of Higher Learning, or CIT, or whatever, we don't think, okay, I want to find out exactly where that comes from and where, who's getting paid. We just think, okay, that well-known body. And I get that a lot from people saying, look, this is a paper published that proves that the world is run by subterranean 12-foot lizards called Nigel. So therefore...
Of course. And look, and those 12-foot lizards need lobbyists just like anyone else. And so I look forward to following their networks. Nigel, you mentioned a moment ago attention spans and, of course, kind of the new iterations of social media and how we're all following and consuming news these days. And one example that comes to mind, which I think was too recent to make it into the book, was out of the country of Hungary under, of course, Viktor Orban, which has launched one of the more substantial lobbying campaigns in the United States. And one of the things I have done over and over and over again is hire these, I guess you could call them conservative social media influencers, those who are very much in the Trumpist orbit and spend a lot of time on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram. And there was one guy in particular who was, for all intents and purposes, just kind of a troll, right? He doesn't provide any kind of real thorough content, but he is constantly defending the Hungarian government, constantly whitewashing much of the corruption and alleged corruption and crimes associated with Viktor Orban. And he had this tweet, right? Again, kind of defending himself, when people would come and say, why are you, going to bat for Orban day in and day out? And he said, look, I believe in Orban's project. I think the Orban model should absolutely be implemented in the United States of America. And I say this, and I don't do this for any money. I would not do this for any money whatsoever. Now, the reason I mention that, Giles, is because a few months later, the United States foreign lobbyists, they have to disclose to the Department of Justice what they're doing and what they're posting and who they're contacting. Those are the regulations. And a few months after that tweet, it just so happened that he filed some paperwork with the Department of Justice. He disclosed how many tens of thousands of dollars he was taking from the Hungarian government. And he included that tweet right in his federal filings. And again, you just can't make this stuff up. And sometimes you just can't help but laugh, because here he is saying he's not doing it for the money. And then, of course, he's disclosing tens of thousands of dollars just to tweet about how wonderful Viktor Orban truly is.
Yes, we live in interesting times. What's the going rate, for a midterm, or is it sort of have your own figure and put a couple of zeros on it?
I hesitate to say this, Giles. I kind of think these foreign lobbyists are selling themselves a little short.
Right.
Whether it's tens of thousands of dollars for tweets, or even just a couple $1 million for an annual contract. I mean, again, these regimes have more money than I'll ever see. They have more money than God, right? They have effectively bottomless pots of wealth that they can draw from. And, far be it for me to tell these foreign lobbyists to go out and make more money. But, look, I think they could be a little better negotiators down the line.
What do you hope that people will learn from foreign agents?
I hope they will learn about the scope and the scale of the foreign lobbying industry. I hope they will learn, certainly those in the United States of America or those who are interested in American history, that this is not something that is just recent, that is not something that is attached just to figures like Donald Trump, but has been going on for a long time. And I do hope what they will take away are some of the actual, and again, silver linings, relative successes we have seen on the policy side in the United States of America, because especially in listeners, that regulatory framework out of Brussels, out of London, out of Oslo or elsewhere still has not yet been implemented. And it would be wonderful to see far more transparency on the European side of things as well. If
people want to find you on the socials, where should they look?
Well, they can certainly go to CaseyMichel.com. They can go to my day job at the Human Rights Foundation, hrf.org. And God knows if they still want to spend time on Twitter, at CJC Michel.
Casey Michel, the book is called Foreign Agents. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Giles.